The wind howled, rattling the windows, slipping through the cracks like icy fingers. Inside, Mark exhaled slowly, adjusting the thermostat, pulling his blanket tighter. The storm had arrived early, the kind of cold that sank into your bones and refused to let go. Outside, the world was disappearing, snow swallowing the streets, turning the neighborhood into an endless white void. Then a sound. Not the wind. Something else. A faint rustling. A low whimper. Mark froze. For a second, he thought he imagined it. Then again, a sound so weak, so fragile, it almost wasn't there at all. His frown deepened. He stood, crossed the room, and pulled back the curtain. And his breath caught in his throat. At first, he wasn't sure what he was looking at. A shape, dark against the snow. Still. Too still. His heart kicked up. Then, the wind shifted. The porch light flickered. For a split second, the swirling snow parted. And that's when he saw her. A German shepherd. Standing, completely frozen in the storm. Not moving. Not blinking. Just staring. Directly at his house. Mark stared back. Something about her was wrong. Not just the fact that she was out there in this weather. Not just the way her fur was caked in frost, her body rigid. It was her eyes. Dark. Intense. Unblinking. Not desperate. Not begging. She wasn't whining. Wasn't barking. She was waiting. Then his stomach dropped. Something shifted near her paws. Mark's breath hitched. His eyes flicked lower. And that's when he saw them. Two tiny puppies. Barely visible in the snow. Curled up at their mother's feet. Shaking. Weak. Too weak. Mark couldn't move. A mother. A storm. Two helpless pups. His pulse pounded in his ears. The storm was only getting worse. And yet, the mother just stood there. Unmoving. Like she wasn't asking for help. Like she had already made peace with what came next. And that scared him the most. Mark's hands hovered over the doorknob. Every instinct in his body screamed at him. Open it. Let them in. But something fell off. He took another glance through the window. The mother dog hadn't moved. Not an inch. She wasn't pacing. Wasn't scratching at the door. She just stood there, as if waiting for permission. And those pups? They weren't crying. Weren't making a sound. That wasn't normal. They should be moving. They should be fighting. But they weren't. They were too weak. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. He knew what this meant. If he didn't act now, he wouldn't be saving them. He'd be burying them. Without thinking, Mark grabbed his flashlight, his boots, and his jacket. He pushed the door open, and the wind hit him like a blade. The snow whipped against his face, burning his skin. For a split second, he hesitated. If it was this bad for him, what had it been like for them? He stepped onto the porch, his breath coming out in fast, cloudy bursts. Hey girl. His voice barely cut through the wind. The German shepherd's ears twitched. But she still didn't move. Mark took a slow step forward, the snow crunching beneath his boots. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness. That's when he saw it. Her fur. It wasn't just frozen. It was caked in ice. Like she'd been standing there for hours. Maybe longer. Waiting. Mark knelt down. Slow. Careful. It's okay, he murmured. The mother dog lowered her head slightly. Then, she did something that sent chills through his spine. She nudged one of the pups forward. Just slightly. Mark's heart stopped. She wasn't just asking for help. She was giving him up. Like she had already made peace with what happened to her. As long as they survived. A sharp burn clawed at Mark's throat. He felt his knees hit the snow. And before he even realized it, his arms were reaching out. He scooped up the first pup. So small. So weightless. Barely breathing. The second one didn't even stir. Mark's chest tightened. No. Not tonight. Not like this. He turned back to the mother. Their eyes met. A moment of understanding passed between them. He wasn't leaving her behind. Not now. Not ever. Mark turned. Rushed toward the house. And as he crossed the threshold, holding those fragile little lives against his chest, the mother dog finally followed. Not because she was desperate. Not because she was scared. But because she trusted him. And in that moment, Everything changed. Speech balloon, if you were in Mark's shoes. Would you have hesitated? Or open the door right away? Fire, if this moment hit you in the heart, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes, saving a life starts with just opening the door. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them. Mark didn't stop moving. He rushed to the fireplace, laying the pups on a soft towel, their tiny bodies barely rising and falling with each breath. Their fur was soaked, clumped with ice, fragile. Too cold. Too weak. He grabbed another towel, gently rubbing the first pup. No reaction. No movement. Mark's chest tightened. He turned to the mother dog, still standing at the doorway. She hadn't moved from the threshold, like she wasn't sure she belonged inside. Mark met her eyes. "Come in," he whispered. A pause. Then, she stepped forward. And finally, she let the door close behind her. The pups needed warmth. Fast. Mark grabbed a small heating pad, wrapping it in a towel before placing the pups on top of it. One stirred. Just barely. The other? Nothing. Mark swallowed hard. No. He wasn't losing them. He moved faster, hands shaking, gently massaging their tiny paws, encouraging circulation, whispering to them, "Come on, little one, you're safe now." He reached for the second pup, the one that hadn't moved at all. Mark pressed his ear close. Was it even breathing? Silence. His heart clenched. And then, the smallest sound. A breath. A tiny, fragile breath. Mark exhaled a shaking laugh. "That's it, buddy. Stay with me." The mother dog finally moved. She lowered herself beside them, ears twitching, eyes locked onto Mark's hands as he rubbed warmth back into their tiny bodies. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to take over. She just watched, trusting him. For the first time, Mark realized this wasn't a dog used to kindness. She was watching him like someone who had never been saved before. And that thought? It hit him harder than he expected. Hours passed. The pups were finally warming up, their breathing steadier. Mark sat back, running a hand down his face. That's when he noticed it. A mark on the mother's ear. At first, he thought it was just a scar. But when he looked closer, his stomach dropped. It wasn't a wound. It was a tattoo. A faded number. And just like that, he knew. This wasn't just a stray. This was a dog who had never known freedom. Mark's fingers hovered over his phone. He started searching. Shelter records. Breeder tags. Lost dogs. And then, his hands froze. An article. 2 towns over. Illegal breeder shut down. Over 20 dogs missing. Mark's chest tightened. She had escaped. And she had run as far as she could. Not for herself. For them. Mark looked at the mother dog. And suddenly, he could see it. The cages. The darkness. The metal floors that were always cold. The hands that only reached for her when they wanted something. She had been a prisoner her whole life. And when she finally had a chance to run, she didn't run for freedom. She ran to save them. Mark's throat burned. He swallowed. Hard. How long had she been running? How many doors had she passed hoping, just once, someone would open them? Mark looked at his own door. And for the first time he realized she hadn't been standing there because she was lost. She had been waiting to see if he was the kind of person who would open it. Then a sound. A hard, deliberate knock at the front door. Mark's entire body tensed. The mother dog lifted her head, ears stiff. The pups, now warm, curled against her. Mark stood. Slowly. Through the window, a shadow stood on his porch. A man. Dark coat. Still. Waiting. Mark's stomach dropped. This wasn't a neighbor. This wasn't someone lost in the storm. This was someone looking for something. Or someone. The mother dog stared at the door. And, in her eyes, Mark saw it. Fear. Pure, silent fear. And suddenly, he knew exactly why this man was here. Mark stood frozen. Outside, the figure didn't move. The knock had been sharp. Deliberate. Not the kind of knock from a lost traveler or a concerned neighbor. This was someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. Behind him, the mother dog had lowered herself protectively over her pups. Her body tense. Eyes locked on the door. And that fear? It wasn't just instinct. It was recognition. She knew who was on the other side. Mark's hands curled into fists. This wasn't just a lost dog. This was a dog someone wanted back. And Mark? He wasn't about to let that happen. Another knock. Louder this time. More impatient. Mark's breath came in short, sharp bursts. His mind raced. He wasn't stupid. Whoever this was, they weren't here to ask questions. He glanced at the mother dog. She was silent, but her entire body was coiled like a spring. She wasn't looking at Mark. She was looking at the pups, like she was already preparing to run again. Mark's heart tightened. No, she wasn't running again. Not this time. His jaw locked. Then, without breaking eye contact with her, he reached for the light switch. Click. The house went dark. Outside, the figure shifted. A beat of silence. Then footsteps. Retreating. Disappearing into the storm. Mark waited, barely breathing. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then nothing. Whoever they were gone. For now. Mark finally turned back to the mother dog. She was watching him. And for the first time, her body wasn't tense. She was still scared. But something was different. Something in her eyes. For the first time since she arrived, she looked safe. Mark sank onto the floor beside her. The pups shifted slightly, their tiny breaths soft against the blanket. One of them, the weakest one, twitched its nose, stretching. Mark let out a breathless chuckle. You made it, little guy. The mother dog leaned forward. And then she did something that made Mark freeze. She pressed her nose against his hand. Not out of fear, not out of desperation, but trust. Mark swallowed hard. She had given him her pups first. And now, she was giving him something even bigger. Herself. The storm had passed. The pups had grown stronger. And the mother dog? She never left his side. She followed him to the kitchen, waited by the door when he stepped outside. She had once stood alone in the snow, waiting for a miracle. Now, she had one. And Mark? He had something, too. Because sometimes, when you save a life, it saves you right back. Imagine this. A storm rages outside. The wind howls. And at your door, a mother dog stands, silent, waiting, trusting you with the only thing she has left. Would you have opened the door? Would you have let her in? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story made your heart race, brought tears to your eyes, or reminded you that kindness changes lives, hit that subscribe button. Because dogs don't just need rescuing. Sometimes they rescue us too.